A very good evening and welcome to the national broadcast. I am Malsha Dharmavardhana.
A very good evening to you. I am Dishan Veerakone, and we start off by taking a look at your top stories for tonight. Report of the Presidential Commission on the Easter Sunday attacks submitted to the Attorney General. Another 500,000 COVID-19 vaccines arrive in the country. President says new technological methods will be introduced to enhance the trade portion related to Sri Lanka in the global economy. Member States reiterates that the resolutions of the Human Rights Council should be unbiased and non-politicized. Police apprehends 45 kilos of heroin in Horana. COVID-19 infections in Ukraine increased by 40% in the last 24 hours.
On to those and other stories in detail now, starting with your local stories. The final report of the Presidential Commission of Inquiry on the Easter Sunday attacks have been handed over to the Attorney General Dappula de Oliveira for further legal actions. Meanwhile, the report was tabled in the Parliament today. The final reports of the Presidential Commission of Inquiry on the Easter Sunday attacks was handed over by the Director General of the Legal Affairs to the Presidential Secretariat, Harigupta Rohanadira. It was held at the Attorney General's Department today. Coordinating Officer to the Attorney General State Counsel Nisha Rajaratna said that the Attorney General has requested the Secretary to the President to submit Volume 2 to 5, which contains all proceedings, documents and material of the Commission of Inquiry pertaining to the Easter Sunday attacks. She said that the Attorney General requested all volumes of the reports to consider whether investigations have to be conducted on the suspects before prosecution and to determine whether the suspects can be prosecuted based on evidence submitted before the Presidential Commission. The report of the Presidential Commission of Inquiry on the Easter Sunday attacks were tabled in Parliament by Leader of the Home, Minister Dinesh Gunawardena. Minister Dinesh Gunawardena said that prior to the debate, an agreement was reached in this regard. He said that as the Prime Minister, a date can be allocated for the debate in this regard.
In the meantime, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa says that the government is committed in introducing new technological means for each sector in an effort to enhance the trade portion related to Sri Lanka in the global economy. Now, the President made these remarks while addressing the Science and Technology Summit of the Non-Aligned Movement. Sri Lanka hosted and sponsored this year's summit, with representatives from 22 countries participating in the summit via Zoom technology.
Science and technology based planning is what was used to build and transform the world. Indeed, technology provides answers to many of the challenges that are taking place in this dynamic world. Current COVID-19 pandemic and the development of different types of vaccines in record time with adequate clinical trials is a living example to show the important role that could be played by science and technology in human life. It is well known that we face major challenges in introducing new technologies due to high capital investment. Similarly, there is heavy competition developing countries have to face. As a result, our own inventions do not progress much. My government, therefore, has established a separate ministry for technology under my purview to introduce new technologies in all feasible sectors, enabling us to increase our market share in the global economy. Exchanging technologies through a center of this nature would be a strategic approach to minimize our capital investment in introducing new technologies. Sri Lanka has currently embarked on introducing a scientific approach and technological advancements in major economic sectors such as information and communication technology, agriculture, plantations, and fisheries. We are more than happy to collaborate with other member countries in sharing our best practices in these sectors. Nevertheless, a country to become a technology-based economy, it is important that local and indigenous technologies are integrated with high-end technologies. Sri Lanka has a proud history of indigenous and traditional technologies that are environmentally friendly. This would further elevate the level of cooperation between member countries, especially in introducing and developing new industrial startups in several fields, including herbal and food technology, so as to address issues in pandemic situations. The entire world is now moving towards developing strategies and plans to overcome the adverse impacts caused by COVID-19. Sri Lanka is no exception. Fortunately, Sri Lanka has a strong health system to handle pandemics, and we also observe that the recent pandemic has presented a greater opportunity for the science, technology and innovation sector, especially to showcase the abilities of researchers, scientists and inventors in meeting immediate needs of health sector.
Meanwhile, the latest EVIS Neo Pro laptop manufactured by local computer manufacturing factory EVIS Colombo Limited was presented to President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. The Chancellor of the Rajarata University and the Chief Incumbent of the Mirisavatiya Viharaya, Venerable Italavatanu Veve Jnanathilaka Thera, handed it over to the President. The owner of the Godage Publications, Deshabandhu Sirisumana Godage, was also present on this occasion. Now, the member states of the United Nations Human Rights Council point out that the UNHRC should act in an unbiased manner based on reliable information and without an attitude of interfering when taking measures pertaining to a country. These remarks were made during the debate held on the report related to Sri Lanka presented by the High Commission to the United Nations Human Rights Council.
/1 and related measures, the government
High Commissioner to the United Nations Human Rights Council Michelle Bachelet tabled the report pertaining to Sri Lanka at the 46th session of the Council. It was held at about 9:45 p.m. last night Sri Lankan time. The report consisted of many controversial allegations against the country.
The government has largely closed the door on the possibility of genuine progress to end impunity through a national process. For these reasons, I call on the Council to explore new ways to advance various types of accountability.
Minister Dinesh Gunawardene delivered the statement in response for Sri Lanka. The Foreign Minister, who addressed the Human Rights Council twice within 2 days, rejected the present process of the Council regarding the country.
Ladies and gentlemen, the OHCHR report which is presented today emanates from the resolution 30/1 and 40/1, from which the government of Sri Lanka announced its withdrawal of co-sponsorship at the 43rd session of this council last year. Sri Lanka rejects High Commissioner's report, which is unjustifiably broadened its scope and mandated further, incorporating many issues of governance and matters that are essentially domestic for any self-respecting sovereign country. This is in complete violation of Article 2.7 of the Charter of the UN that states, "Nothing contained in the present Charter shall authorize the United Nations to intervene in matters which are essentially within the domestic jurisdiction of any state." The trajectory that has emerged with regard to the recommendations and conclusions reflects the preconceived, politicized and prejudicial agenda which has certain elements have relentlessly pursued against Sri Lanka. These recommendations are based on ill-founded allegations. Sri Lanka categorically rejects the conclusions and recommendations in the High Commissioner's report.
The debate of the member states on the report was initiated today. A clear division was observed in the debate today. European countries, the United States, and several African nations approved the report of the High Commissioner while directing attention on the future proceedings related to Sri Lanka. However, Asian and Middle Eastern regional countries extended a massive support for Sri Lanka.
To make public a strategy and timetable for implementation of the report's recommendations. We are concerned by accounts of increasing marginalization of minority communities and shrinking space for civil society, including independent media. We remain concerned about the lack of accountability, including high-level appointments of military officials credibly accused of conflict-era abuses. The Sri Lankan government's efforts to address concerns raised in OHCHR's report via a domestic process need to be meaningful and credible. We note that the Sri Lankan Commission of Inquiry does not include a mandate to pursue accountability, and that the Office of Missing Persons and Office of Reparations need to operate without political interference. We note that respect for the human rights of all Sri Lankans is critical to Sri Lanka's long-term peace, security, and prosperity, and call on the Sri Lankan government to take meaningful, concrete steps to promote accountability, justice, and reconciliation.
The Philippines considers the credibility of OHCHR reports to be critical to the integrity of the work of the Council and has consistently called for objectivity and fairness in the reporting process. We are concerned that this report fails to ground itself properly on contextual realities, particularly the challenges of addressing the grave threats of the pandemic and terrorism to Sri Lanka's 21.3 million people. For a country like the Philippines, which has lost precious lives to terrorism, the report's mischaracterization of security policies in Sri Lanka is insensitive to the long struggle of its people against conflict and terrorism. We regret that this feeds the troubling discourse in the Council that downplays the victims of terrorism and earnest efforts by affected countries to stop it within the framework of law. We note that despite challenges, the government of Sri Lanka actively pursues reconciliation, accountability, and human rights through domestic processes with all stakeholders.
We note Sri Lanka's openness to dialogue on human rights and the country's readiness to continue discussing existing problems and ways to resolve them, including through international technical assistance. We also feel it is important to note that within this work, Sri Lanka must itself, without external pressure, determine the priorities for action and the areas which require international assistance. Only in that way can the measures truly be effective and facilitate a real strengthening of the promotion and protection of human rights in the country. We confirm our position on the fact that existing issues with human rights in countries can only be resolved with the interested countries through open, constructive dialogue and
Japan recognizes Sri Lanka's efforts to promote reconciliation and the well-being of all its people, including support to families of victims of enforced disappearance through the Office of Missing Persons and the Office for Reparations. Meanwhile, Japan notes reports of many uninvestigated disappearances and excessive restrictions on human rights in recent years. It is vital that Sri Lanka itself takes actions and introduces remedies to realize reconciliation and improvement of human rights. Japan sincerely hopes Sri Lanka will follow this path and expects the international community, including OHCHR, to support Sri Lanka's own initiatives. Japan has supported the reconciliation process through capacity building in the justice system. For many years, Japan's representative on peace building, rehabilitation and reconstruction, Mr. Akashi Yasushi, and Judge Noguchi Moto, has been dispatched to the country to work together with stakeholders. We will continue to encourage efforts by Sri Lanka.
The Council has adopted 7 resolutions on the question of human rights in Sri Lanka since May 2009. India has been an active participant in the discussions and has remained engaged with Sri Lanka as its close friend and immediate neighbor. India's consistent position rests on two pillars: support for Sri Lanka's unity and territorial integrity, and abiding commitment to aspirations of the Tamils of Sri Lanka for equality, justice, peace and dignity. These are not either-or choices. We believe that respecting the rights of the Tamil community, including through meaningful devolution, contributes directly to the unity and integrity of Sri Lanka. Therefore, we advocate that delivering on the legitimate aspirations of the Tamil community is in the best interest of Sri Lanka. We call upon Sri Lanka to take necessary steps for addressing such aspirations, including through the process of reconciliation and full implementation of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution of Sri Lanka. The assessment of the High Commissioner raises important concerns. The Sri Lankan government has articulated its position on these issues as well. In evaluation of both of these, we should be guided by a commitment to find a lasting and effective solution for this issue.
My delegation takes note of the High Commission's report on Sri Lanka and has attentively listened to the statement made by the countries concerned. We note with appreciation the sincere efforts made by the government of Sri Lanka for promotion and protection of human rights in the country, despite many challenges. In our view, country report before the Council often debate from the principle of objectivity and non-bias, relying on unverified and groundless information spread by the media and dishonest forces for sinister political purposes, rather than the information provided by the concerned country. We are of the view that when dealing with the country's situation, the OHCHR should pay more attention to the explanation of the countries concerned, as they know the real situation on the ground more than anyone else, and pursue sincere engagement in strict observance of the principle of impartiality, objectivity, non-politicization, non-interference, mutual respect, and cooperation.
Madam President, as a friendly neighbor of Sri Lanka, China sincerely hopes that Sri Lanka maintains political stability, ethnic solidarity, and national unity, and wishes Sri Lanka greater achievements in its national development. We commend the government of Sri Lanka for its efforts to actively promote and protect human rights, advance sustainable economic and social development, improve people's living standards, protect the rights of vulnerable groups, actively promote national reconciliation, and combat terrorism. It is the consistent stand of China to oppose politicization, double standards on human rights, as well as using human rights as pretext for interference in others' internal affairs. We are concerned about the prominent lack of impartiality shown in the OHCR's report on Sri Lanka and express our regret over the failure of OHCR to take on board the authoritative information provided by Sri Lankan government. The so-called preventive intervention and the proposed targeted sanctions contained in the report are clear interference in the internal affairs of Sri Lanka and oversteps the mandate of OHCHR. We hope the Council and OHCHR to strictly follow principles of impartiality, objectivity, non-selectivity, and non-politicization, respect the sovereignty and political independence of all countries, acknowledge the efforts of countries' protection and promotion of human rights, advocate constructive dialogue and cooperation, and abandon the practice of interfering in the internal affairs of state and exerting political pressure. Thank you, Madam President.
My delegation takes notes of relevant reports as to the situation in Sri Lanka and welcomes the country's constructive cooperation with the OHCHR and active engagements with various mandate holders. The government's commitment to the 2030 agenda, including an appointment of the new Sustainable Development Council, as well as positive steps taken to continue peace building and to mitigate the spread of the COVID-19, should be recognized. Cambodia also notes that the challenges confronting Sri Lanka are complex in nature. As the international community, we can keep our role within a constructive framework respecting Sri Lanka-led and Sri Lankan-owned process based on national priorities and institutions. Madam President, human rights agenda must be discussed through a genuine dialogue-based approach with non-confrontation, non-politicization, and non-selectivity, based on verified source of information, bearing in mind the national particularity of each country. The enduring strength of all human rights mechanisms lies in an even-handed approach with transparency, objectivity, and impartiality, as well as in full adherence to the principle of sovereign equality, territorial integrity, and non-interference, which are well enshrined in the UN Charter. Thank you.
You're watching the national broadcast, and we continue with more local stories. Minister ChannelEye Rupavahini urges that the report of the High Commissioner of the United Nations Human Rights Council is completely based without any reasonable doubt. The minister has pointed out that the oppression faced by the innocent Tamil community as well as their children in the hands of Prabhakaran and his associates have been deemed as a human rights violation. Minister ChannelEye Rupavahini said that the report of High Commissioner of United Nations Human Rights Council is completely based without any reasonable doubt. He said that the UN Human Rights High Commissioner has not uttered a single word and overlooked the oppression faced by the Tamil community from the armed training force on children and compelling the associates of the LTT to wear cyanide around their necks and to carry weapons. He said that the council is acting upon personal agenda and needs. He added that they are prepared to defeat the falsified report.
අතට පොතපත වෙනුවට දුන්නේ තුවක්කුව බයි නැතුව. ඒක ඒව ගැන මානව හිමිකම් කොමසාරිස්වරියවත් කිසි කෙනෙක් වචනයක්වත් අද වෙනකන් කතා කරලා නැහැ. ඉතින් තාමත්ම පැහැදිලි පෞද්ගලිකව උන්ගේ දේශපාලන වමනාවන් වෙනුවෙන් ක්‍රියාත්මක වෙනවා. හැම අවස්ථාවකම අපේ මිතුරු රටවල් සමග අපි සාකච්ඡා කරමින් යනවා. ඒ බොරුව පරාජය කළ යුතුයි.
Minister made these remarks while addressing a ceremony held at the Kundasala Divisional Secretariat today. The ceremony was organized to launch the handicraft, including batik products. The minister presented certificates for the producers at the ceremony.
Now, the consignment of 500,000 COVID-19 jabs purchased under the government's COVID-19 immunization program was airlifted from India this afternoon. Accordingly, the consignment of the jabs has costed around 510 million rupees. The consignment of COVID-19 vaccines was brought into the country on AI-273 flight belonging to Air India Airlines. The vaccines have been produced at the Serum Institute in Pune, India. The consignment which arrived in the country today was the second AstraZeneca vaccine consignment received by the country. This is also the first vaccine consignment purchased by the government. The first vaccine consignment was received on January 28th and it was donated to the country in accordance to a request made by President Gotabaya Rajapaksa to Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The vaccine consignment arrived into the country today was handed over by the airport authorities to the health authorities at the airport premises. The vaccine consignment was handed over to the central stores of the epidemiology unit by Chairman of the State Pharmaceutical Corporation, Prasanna Gunasena. Acting Health Minister Professor Channa Jayasumana, Secretary to the Health Ministry Major General Sanjeeva Munasinghe, Secretary to the State Ministry K.R. Uduwavala were present at this occasion. The consignment was then taken to Medical Research Institute to check the condition of the vaccines. The vaccines will be distributed from tomorrow onwards. The epidemiology unit said that the AstraZeneca vaccine has so far been administered to 378,603 persons under the COVID-19 inoculation program. The vaccine program has been carried out for the 28th day today. Another vaccination program was conducted today at the Kettarama temple premises. The residents of Maligavatta, Grandpass, Statespura received the vaccines under the program. Another program to administer AstraZeneca vaccines was organized at the Naharempita Kirula maternity housing premises. Accordingly, 1,000 persons have been vaccinated. The number of recoveries from COVID-19 has reached 76,961. It is a percentage of 94.19. Another 4,289 COVID-19 patients are under treatment at various treatment centers. Another 240 COVID-19 patients were detected in the island today. All the patients have been identified as close contacts of the Paliagoda cluster. 13,714 PCR tests have been conducted yesterday. A total of 2,068,918 PCR tests have been conducted so far in the country. A group of 209 tourists from Kazakhstan arrived in the Mattala Rajapaksa International Airport today. Also 200 tourists arrived from Kazakhstan previously left Sri Lanka today. Meanwhile, a nanotechnological antivirus face mask were presented to Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa today. An expert group including Senior Professor of Peradeniya University, Gami Rajapaksa and Dr. Chaminda Herath has produced the new face mask. Now, two books authored by Chief Sanganayaka of the Western Province, Venerable Dr. Muruthettuwe Ananda Thera, were launched today. The books have been titled as Helaweda Kame Yata Giyawa and Run Here. The first editions of the books Helaweda Kame Yata Giyawa and Run Here were presented to the President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. The event was held at the Presidential Secretariat. The official book launching ceremony was held at the Naharempita Abhayarama Viharaya. The event was held under the patronage of Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa. Many parliamentarians and ministers were present at this occasion. The special address of the ceremony was delivered by Professor of the Kelaniya University, Venerable Induragare Dhammaratana Thera.
We continue with more local stories. Panadura Central Anti-Corruption Unit has apprehended more than 45 kilos of heroin in van during a raid conducted in Horane area. The raid was conducted when catch of illegal drug was transported in a van which has been acquired by Sri Lankan Army on rent basis. The police have received a tip-off citing that this illegal drug racket has been operated from a foreign country. The police said that one of the suspects taken into custody has been identified as an army personnel attached to the Mechanical Infantry Regiment of Sri Lanka Army, while the other suspect is an army desertee. Police media spokesman DIG Ajit Rohana said these two suspects, along with the catch of the illegal drug, was taken into custody last night while exiting from Galanigama Bandaragama Exchange in Southern Expressway after entering from Imaduwa Inter-Exchange.
Now, the Ministry of Education has informed that all preparations have been made to conduct the GCE ordinary level examination while ensuring health protective measures. The examination, which is expected to commence on the 1st of March, will be held on 9 consecutive days. A total of 622,000 candidates are expected to sit for the examination this year. Addressing a media briefing held in Colombo today, Minister Professor G.L. Piri said that the Ministry of Education has directed its complete attention on the continuous progress of the education of the children without any hindrances amidst various challenges. Minister Professor G.L. Piri said that steps have been taken to establish a minimum of 2 examination centres in each district. He said that steps will also be taken to increase the number of centres considering the situation. He added that financial provisions have been allocated in the Colombo district. He also said that 50 million rupees have been allocated for each district. He said that all necessary steps have been taken for the future of the students and requested the parents to allow the students to appear for the examinations. And that's a wrap of tonight's Primetime News, and until we meet again next time, do take care and good night.
Good night.